Hi, David. This is Dan from Desert Island Mix. Welcome to Desert Island Mix.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much for going through the interesting process. But more of that anon. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Married, 2 children, 2 grown-up daughters, and now retired after 35 years in public service. Originally from just outside London, just inside London, I suppose now, Romford in Essex, and educated at school and then the university, where I did a good degree in history before joining the civil service.
You went to a very small local church primary school, didn't you?
I did, yes, yeah. I started there at the age of 4 at St Thomas's Church of England Primary School in Oak Hill, just outside Romford. And I kind of spent, I suppose, 5-6 years there, and there were only 2 classes, so because they thought I was quite smart, so they put me in the top class after about 9 months, and that was it then, really. I spent the next 5 years doing the same thing year in, year out.
Fantastic. And after going to university and studying history at Corpus Christi in Oxford, what did you do after graduating?
I spent a year kind of basically hanging out, and because I had friends who were abroad doing modern languages degrees on their placements abroad, and so I did a series of temporary jobs, everything from working in what was then Morrell's Brewery, casking up beer and giving it to lorry drivers to drive round, and that was pretty scary because they'd each drink about 2 pints in every pub. So by the time they'd finished their rounds, there were 18 pints to the bad. But I think that still counts as my worst job ever. I also worked in a dairy, and I managed a factory that made pumps. I helped put pumps together. And then after that, the civil service seemed quite a cushy little number. So I joined as a temporary civil servant, and thought I quite enjoyed this, playing snooker on King Edward VII snooker table, and so applied to become a permanent civil servant, which I succeeded in, starting just as Margaret Thatcher was elected in 1979.
And how did your move north happen?
Not really by accident, actually. I kind of grew up in London, and I spent a lot of time as a teenager travelling around London. I'm afraid to confess I was a bus spotter at that time, so I spent a lot of time going to all parts of London, but I fell out of love with it, and the civil service in those days was dispersing a lot of jobs out of the capital, and the department I was in, employment, had sent a lot of jobs up to Sheffield, and I thought, quite fancy Sheffield, let's see how that goes. So that's how I came to live in Sheffield, which we lived in on and off for about 15 years. And
that's where you met your wife, Sue, is it not?
It is indeed, yes. So my first day in my new job in Sheffield, I was introduced to the clerical team, and there were 3 of them, and they were all cheeky, and they were all giggling, and I thought, there's one of those that's really rather attractive. And within about 3 months, we were sneaking out together to go to lunch and meeting up after work, and 35 years later, 35 years later, here we still are.
And as I say, the rest is history, but there's an interesting other bit of history, which is your 2 daughters. Say a little bit about those. Yes,
so we've got Sophie, who's now 26, and she lives in London, and she set up a fashion business. A fashion business with a twist. It's not just online, but it's also ethical in every sense. It supplies clothes that have been made ethically, many of them in this country. It markets ethically, so it doesn't use photoshopping, and it tries to extend feminism and fair trade into every aspect of the business. And that's been running for about 3 years now, and pleased to say it's growing. Lucy graduated last year from Edinburgh University, and she's looking around, and hopefully she'll find an academic place academically to pursue her studies into zoology and parasitism, which is a particular interest of hers from her first degree. So at the moment she's working. She's living in Newcastle, so we see quite a bit of her, and that's lovely. So Lucy's 23, Sophie's 26, and they're both wonderful.
And you said you're semi-retired. Just tell us What happened on your last day at work in June 2013?
Well, my last day at work, I'd kind of had quite a build-up in the sense that I'd been working long hours, not taking all my holiday. So when I decided to retire, I thought, well, the sensible thing to do is to take holiday. So for the last 4 or 5 weeks, I only had the occasional meeting at work, and so the end of June, I'd already volunteered earlier in the year to do some work in the bars at the Glastonbury Festival, and so there I was on my last day, being paid as in fact by then in local government, working in local government. My last day was spent watching the Rolling Stones, Nick Cave and various others at Glastonbury, and I thought, this is a great way to go out on.
What a fantastic story about your last day in public service watching Rolling Stones pulling beer at Glastonbury.
Yeah, well, they weren't pulling the beer. I was pulling the beer, of course.
Which moves us nicely, talking of music, onto your very first choice of your Desert Island Mix. Tell us about that.
Yes, so this is Frankie Vaughan and The Green Door. And my mum sort of only had 2 criteria for music that she liked, really. One was whoever sang it should be good looking, and the other was more of a preference. Hopefully they'd be Jewish as well. So Frankie Vaughan met the criteria. We had this record on 78. We had an old-fashioned radiogram that only played 78s, and so we would dance in the living room to this when I was 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, and brings back a lot of happy memories about growing up just on the fringes of London.
Let's listen to Mr. Moonlight doing The Green Door.